The true success of a PM is when you are...
It's very easy to overestimate how global your product, because N26 had an amazing product for continental Europe. Did incredibly well in Germany, did well in France, and the company assumed if it's worked well in continental Europe, US should be easy. Man, is the US different from continental Europe when you try to bring especially a banking product. US is a credit forward market. Everyone wants a credit card because you get points back. The fact that they didn't offer one was a problem. A lot of European companies see the US and say, hey, look, this is the US, so little regulation. It's going to be so easy. And look how much money there is there. They look at the US and it's like those cartoon dollar signs appear on their eyeballs. I think that is a great way to waste a lot of time and energy.
It's like people in the US actually didn't need this product from the first place.
I really loved working at Wise for how mission focused the company was and still is today. The CEO, while I was working there, was incredibly serious about this. He didn't get involved at the level of decisions the product team made in terms of like feature decisions, but he did get involved at the level of every team explain to me how your roadmap contributes to the mission. How is it driving what they call mission zero?
Daniel Thomason, thank you so much for joining this episode. I'm very interested in talking to you because you have a very fascinating experience as a product manager. You worked in multiple different companies, which I would like to know more about them. And we can, I think, start to learn some of the processes they have taken into account. So your background is from economics, and for a period of time, you worked on an escape room. Can you a little bit walk us through your path into product management, and what advice do you have to give to other coming from non-traditional backgrounds?
Sure thing, yeah. And I've been excited about our conversation, Amir, so nice to be here. Yeah, so I studied economics at university after bouncing around a few times, actually. I started out studying mathematics, sociology, French, psychology. I sort of tasted a little bit of the old academic buffet before settling on economics, primarily because I realized it gave me a really nice mental toolkit to solve problems that involve people. You were able to use these really robust analytical models, but use them not just on... I enjoyed maths for maths' sake, but it was sort of... I ended up asking myself, what's the point of solving this integral or whatever? It was self-justifying or it didn't matter. Whereas economics said, hey, these are things that matter. This is how do countries develop. This is how do people make decisions about their family, about their career, and so on. And I found that fascinating, and I loved learning about those sort of models, that toolkit that I could use to think about those problems. So, as a bright young economist in Australia, one of the natural paths is either you go into retail banking or you join the government in some capacity. And I wasn't keen to be a banker per se, so I said, okay, let's join the central bank, which is Australia's answer to the Fed if you're in America, or the ECB if you're in Europe. It's a central bank, which was really amazing. I met a bunch of nice people, really interesting, really smart, really dedicated to their craft. And I got to look at some really interesting problems, like how do Australian households' spending decisions affect financial stability? And I also... Funnily, now that I'm working on digital payment technologies, I started my career looking at old school payment technologies. So banknotes, how they move around the economy, how their quality, the distribution, the cost of producing and disposing of them, that sort of thing, which was really interesting. But after about 2 years, I realized, hey, central bank work, interesting, gave me a really good grounding and a lot of fundamental business skills, but I wanted to be closer to the action in terms of creating something. The central bank is more about preserving what's there and about helping to safeguard the strength of the economy, all very important functions. But for me, the urge to create was very, very strong. And so that's what got me out of the central bank. I said goodbye and then made the kind of crazy career pivot to say, okay, you know what? I enjoy puzzles. I want to create something. Let's go start an escape room. And it was a great time to do that in Australia, actually, because in Europe, escape rooms had been around for years, maybe a decade, and same with some parts of Asia. I think they'd grown up in places like Hungary and then spread to the likes of China and South Korea. But Australia, it was very, very new. And so there were only half a dozen, maybe 10 escape rooms in the whole of Sydney at the time. And so my co-founder and I, it's funny, he used to work at the central bank too. And so we sort of quit together. We said, hey, I think we can do this well. I think we can bring something new to the industry. And also, you know what, it's going to be fun regardless. So let's get out there. Let's try to create something. And yeah, like we just spent 3-4 months bringing this thing to life. I designed the first room myself. I wrote down the specs for all the puzzles, and then it did all the grunt work of like paint the walls, run around the town collecting free furniture off the equivalent of like Craigslist. Like people were like, hey, I've got this table, I need someone to take it away. We're like, yeah, I'll be right there. Went and then rolled it down the street, rolled it onto the train, brought it up to our escape room, did all the marketing, did this partnerships work with a nearby restaurant, and yeah, brought this thing to life. And it was super fun and unbelievably tiring. It was really a kind of 24/7 job. Like it was just me, my co-founder, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, helping us. And I really loved the experience. But it was clear after a while, it became a bit clear. Okay, look, this is a small business. It's fun. It's going to do well. It was profitable after a short amount of time, but it's not going to help me retire at the age of 40 kind of thing. Like it's going to require investment the whole life cycle. And so a friend recommended to me, hey, look, if you want to do the same sort of thing, but apply those skills at a larger scale, by just thinking about product management, because it's kind of what you've been doing to a large extent. Like you've been designing a product, you've been like writing the specs for how it should work, you've been doing all of the adjacent things to bring it to life, and then you've been kind of tweaking it as you've gone. So that's kind of product management. And if you do it in a tech context, that's how to go from dozens, hundreds of users to thousands, millions of users. And so, yeah, so then that's when I kind of pivoted into product management, which now, 7-8 years later, has been an amazing shift. And definitely, I mean, I kind of wish that someone had told me about product management at university, because it's not the sort of thing, it just doesn't get talked about. Like product management, at least, I don't know if it's different today. Maybe at university, people are more aware of it. But back in the day, 10 years ago, a little more, I had no idea this existed. When this friend of mine told me about it, I had to go and Google what is product management, because it was just like what is a product manager? And so I'm like, I kind of wish I'd known about that back in the day. And I guess that it would be my advice to people who want to get into product management. Like, don't see it as this, I've got a lot I can say on this, but like, I'll stop with a sentence here of like, don't see it as this thing that's just for computer science majors who were an engineer and then they switched into product management. It's very much, it's a career that's open to anyone who's interested in creating and enjoys the pieces around the board to bring something to life, I guess. So you can be a product manager too, I guess is the catchphrase I'd like to leave people with.
I started as an engineer, Android developer, and then I slowly transitioned. I learned about marketing. And I was always curious, like, what is one role that will do everything? So how can I find that role?
Exactly.
And then later I just came across product management. And I also was more curious to understand what's the difference between project management and product management. And then I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like we can do sales, we can talk to engineers, we talk to different stakeholders, we go out there, understand the user's need. Like I think one of the best way that I heard the product management role to be described is like, it's like a mini CEO within the company. You're like literally the right hand of the CEO. And of course, this could be different company to company. A follow-up question on that. I know you worked at N26, which is based in Germany, and then Wise in Estonia. So, and now in San Francisco at Google. What was it different when you worked within Europe as a PM? And what did you learn? Do you have any wild stories that you could share?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Having worked on 3 different continents, it's pretty clear that cultural differences in company style and management style and just approach to particularly startups and tech work are pretty stark. I suspect, I've never worked in Asia, but I suspect that would be yet another big difference. But certainly speaking, taking Europe versus the US, one of the big differences I observed in German startup life versus working in the US at least was how geared German startups are towards sort of an early definition of the business model and how it's going to be profitable, and a very clear idea of how to manage it end to end, almost as a more industrial style process. To me, I've made sense of this by thinking, okay, looking at Germany as an economy, it became the powerhouse that it is through manufacturing, through like being an industrial economy, which is lends itself to a very tight control style of management. Like if you're making cars, you want to know every step of the way, input through to output, what's it costing, what is the quality, what's the defect rate, and it lends itself to a hands-on presence and level of sort of management involvement that results in, look, German car manufacturers are still among the best in the world. Versus the US, certainly in Silicon Valley, is much more about a kind of hands-off, allow 1,000 flowers to bloom style of approach to at least the tech world. I'm sure there's, if I worked in manufacturing in the US, or if I worked in pharmaceuticals or what have you, it'd be very different. But at least for tech product management, my experience has been that the US leans much more into a ethos of it's less important how efficient the process is of creating this tech product, of bringing this feature to market, what have you. It's much more important that the 100, 1000x feature have a chance to be brought to life. And I guess another way of putting that is US companies, in my experience, like from both working at Google, but also sort of having friends at other companies here and having observed them, are much more tolerant of making a dozen bets that don't pay off, where engineers and product managers are wasted per se, in exchange for getting that 1, 2, 3 features that are enormous, that increase the revenue by 10x or what have you. German companies, at least the ones that I worked at, are much more cautious about the investments they make and are much more keen to see an immediate return on, hey, we had a team of 10 people, engineers, designers, product managers working on this for a year. What's it done for us? And if the answer is, well, that was a bet that didn't pay off, there's maybe less appetite to hear that answer too many times on the German side. And for me, I prefer the US style. I like the kind of running fat, as it were, of make a bunch of bets, concentrate on the possible upside rather than control the efficiency. But I don't think there's a better or a worse model. I think it's just you're more looking at what sort of companies thrive under these two different conditions. When do you have a company that has much less bounded upside, and so hence you want to make a bunch of bets and look for the 10x, the 100x ones, versus when do you have companies that have a much narrower range of outcomes that they can possibly create, and hence a tighter control over efficiency of input versus outputs actually makes much more sense. And so that's one of the big differences I saw between at least German style and a style company. And then Estonia, it's a little bit hard because Estonia, it's funny, I don't know if you or your listeners know, but Estonia has the highest rate of unicorn companies per capita of any country in the world, mostly because, to their credit, they've invested a lot in the tech sector. They really, as a country, over the last decade or two, went heavily down the road of encouraging STEM education and encouraging students to study coding or coding adjacent subjects. And so they had the likes of Skype, they've got Wise now, they've got Twilio, like a couple of big companies were either founded there or have significant presences there. And so Estonia is a little bit halfway between. It was my experience. Like, it's definitely influenced by the European ethos and certainly like the Central European model of company management and thinking about companies looms large in Europe. But Estonia is sort of very geared towards, hey, looking at other countries and seeing how they succeeded and saying, hey, the tech sector works. The tech sector is a great innovation source and a great source of national prosperity. And so they've tried to, I think, adopt a lot of the mindsets and practices of places like Silicon Valley. And so my experience with at least working at Wise was that it was much more geared towards autonomy, allowing product teams quite a lot of autonomy to make the bets that they thought were the right ones. But on the other hand, still had a little bit of that, okay, but show us how this is helping. Show us the bottom line on this. Show us the return on investment. Like, you need to make a case. There can't just be throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. There really needs to be, look, you're in charge, but if questioned, you need to be able to justify, why is this going to make sense for the thing that you've been entrusted with on behalf of the company, on behalf of the customers. So yeah, I guess Estonia was kind of an interesting middle ground I found between that Central European German style of company tech product management kind of life versus what I've now experienced in the US.
It's very interesting because I also had the same experience. First of all, there's one misconception when people talk about Europe. They see Europe as one.
Yeah.
It's not as one.
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely not. When you go from west to east, their culture fully changes. The way they think fully changes. Their background, their history, what happened in their history fully changes. Who conquered who, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
Just fully changes their culture, their behavior. And I love just traveling because it just opens your eye to understand that they're not the same. Some of them, maybe like one or two countries are similar to each other, or there are similarities, but I would put them in a group of like 2 countries being similar to each other, 3 countries being kind of close to each other in certain things. But in general, I don't think you can definitely see them as one. And with your experience working in German company, what I felt with that approach, I think that very systematic approach gives creativity in the product. So it's like we follow rules and we cannot break those rules. And what I also feel in the US is like there is no rule. It's we follow what we want to create, and the sky is the limit. But here, maybe it's just regulation, maybe it's the way people were raised, but then they have these systematic things they constantly follow, even in their work, and then even when they're like a product manager. So I'm just curious, what do you think when a product manager works in a company, which is a global company, and you're working with different stakeholders, which maybe one is from Estonia, one is from Germany, one is from Australia. Do you have any advice for someone working? Because I think the true success of a PM is when you are working with all these different people and different cultures. How can you understand them and how can you navigate better in the company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, in today's world, working in tech, you're almost inevitably going to be working with international stakeholders. Like it's funny, I lived in Berlin for 4 years. My wife is German. We had about 5 German friends. That was it. Most of our friends, most of my colleagues came from different parts of Europe or India or China or Australia. Like, it really was. The tech world is so international at its core that as a product manager, you're going to hit cultural differences and just like hit that question of how do these international or just intercultural distinctions play out for me in terms of the product I'm trying to bring life, in terms of the team that I have that I'm working with, in terms of the stakeholders that I have, in terms of the customers that I have. Like, that was a big thing. One of the big learnings that we had, or that I took away from working at N26, was it's very easy to overestimate how global your product is. Because N26 had an amazing product for continental Europe. Like, it did incredibly well in Germany, did well in France, like a lot of the sort of Central European countries, and then a lot of the ones on the peripheral as well, honestly, like, were really hungry for this model of the nice looking, well-designed digital first bank. And the company assumed, okay, if it's worked well in continental Europe, I mean, the UK, it's right there. At the time it was part of the EU, should be easy, right? Not so much. It was kind of challenging. And then they tried to cross the pond over to the US. And they're like, well, look, we understand continental Europe. US should be easy. Man, is the US different from continental Europe when you're trying to bring, especially a banking product to market. So that's just a bit of a side note of like understanding how your customers think if they're coming from different countries of the world, different cultures, is also a pretty big part of this. But I mean, the day-to-day impact of this for a product manager is very much going to be felt in terms of your work with stakeholders. Like, you're going to have people, like I've throughout my entire career, I've worked with engineers from different parts of the world. I've worked with compliance people who come from South Africa, Estonia, the UK, the US, like everywhere, legal, design, like all these stakeholders. Like there's very seldom been kind of okay, all of design comes from Germany, and so I can just understand the German design model. It's very much a sort of matrix model of culture, country, and kind of function. And I guess it comes, for me, the way I've navigated this is the same principles that apply to, I think, effective stakeholder management generally, independent of the cross-cultural aspect, which is, for me, at its core, understanding, okay, this person I'm talking to, two things. What are they trying to achieve? Like, what is their job? What is their desired outcome from this specific interaction we're having, but also generally from their work life? What does good look like? What does bad look like for them? So as a compliance person, bad is going to look like negative regulatory attention or a fine or the company being shut down, that sort of thing. And in the short term, bad is going to look like the chief compliance officer bringing them in for a very unhappy chat kind of thing. So like they have a kind of a fairly large downside they need to be concerned about, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second lens, and this is the one that applies a little bit more to the intercultural, is specific person, what lenses, what mindsets, what attitudes towards work and the company and the product are they bringing to bear on this? And that's a lot harder to do, honestly. Like the first question you can kind of answer with reference to just the role without thinking about the individual. You can say, okay, a compliance person in general is going to care about these things and be scared about these things. An engineer is going to care about these things and be scared about these things, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe it varies a little bit depending on their exact situation, like the specific product or what have you. But in general, reference to the specific function will serve you well. It's that second layer that's where the superpower, I think, of product management comes in, of saying, okay, this person, Amir, is not just a product manager on another team. He's an individual who's brought a specific set of experiences, a specific background, a specific set of strengths, and a specific set of potentially blind spots to this role. How much do I know of this? How much can I sort of dig into that a little bit and try to understand what's his perspective so that I can speak a language that he will appreciate, he will understand, he will be able to relate to, so that both of us can get out of this interaction what we want to. And that's tough. I mean, it's easy to say that sentence, but like as a PM, like you've got 1,000 demands on your time. Like it's not like you have a bunch of time to just like sit on LinkedIn or the internal intranet and just like have a look at what's Amir been doing, like what's his background, like let's read a bunch of his documents or what have you. Like you don't always have that time. But in my experience, spending just a bit of time on that, particularly for the critical relationships, saying, hey, okay, this compliance person, yes, in general, compliance people care about X, Y, Z, right? But this specific compliance person actually doesn't come from a compliance background. She's coming from like a marketing background and then pivoted via legal. And so she actually brings a very customer-centric mindset to this role. And so, yes, she's going to be concerned as a compliance person about regulatory effects, but it will be more effective for me to speak to her in the terms of, for example, hey, this is the impact this is going to have on our customers and on the value proposition that we're presenting to them, rather than just keeping it at the kind of level of like, here's the dry regulatory stuff. And then you can layer in the cultural or the international component too of like, okay, here's someone who has spent most of their career in Germany working in very, very strong management-driven company cultures. Okay, so they're going to potentially respond well to an approach that is much more about, hey, here's the plan that's come down from our leaders. Here's how this thing fits into that plan. Here's the steps along the way, and here's the return on investment, versus maybe talking to someone who has come from a US background working with Silicon Valley companies, where you might want to sell to them the vision, the potential upside, the like beautiful wireframes or the mock-ups, much more of the dream, and focus on that side. So all of which to say, I guess like that second lens on a particular stakeholder interaction of like this particular individual, how can I best understand them and how they are going to relate to this interaction. One component of that, certainly, and a rich component of that, is where have they potentially grown up, or at least where have they spent professional life that might be coloring what they bring to this interaction and will provide me with some way of making this conversation, making this request more palatable or more easily comprehensible to them. And that's how I kind of approach it. And that's been a pretty useful tool at my disposal in my experience.
You had a very interesting point on when you thinking that we had a good success in Europe. Let's enter US. And when they start entering, they were like, oh my God, this is another monster we should beat. So my question is, why was it some difficulties and how do they overcame that?
Good question. And I mean, it's not just N26. I've seen this with a lot of companies I've worked with, that international expansion is challenging, much more challenging than you think going in. You think, in particular, going somewhere like the US, you think, hey, look, we already have English language. We don't even need to translate it. Like localization is not a problem. We'll just drop a few S's and turn them into Z's. We'll drop a few U's from our words. It's fine. It's not a problem. And I guess the challenges that I think came up were really top to bottom. Like you just saw it permeate the whole question of what the product should be. Like, I'll give you a couple of examples, but it really was just throughout the whole thing, such that I think to succeed in a move to the US would really have required, like, it didn't work. It didn't work. The N26 exited the US. And I think to have made it work would have required going in with a completely humble attitude of, okay, we're going to have to question everything and have someone on the ground saying, hey, we've got a good core product, but what does this market need? What can we take from our core product? And what are we going to have to invent from scratch? Rather than just saying, let's throw the core product in and tweak it wherever we have to, which seemed to be the attitude. So some examples of that were, I worked on a compliance product. That's why I keep referring to compliance, on the Know Your Customer, so identity verification for N26. And in Europe, that follows a fairly rigid pattern of you need to meet certain criteria, and it's fairly high regulatory requirements, and it's pretty well understood that like what was needed. You needed the photo ID, you needed the video in Germany, all this sort of stuff. And if that didn't work, you could fall back to this, and so on and so on. In the US, much looser model. Like you could verify people using just their social security number. And if that worked, great. It literally took 30 seconds and they were in with a bank account. Much easier than Europe. But that only worked about 2/3 of the time. And so then you've got 1/3 of cases, which is a pretty big number, where you suddenly went, okay, now what? Like, we don't have the same system as we have in Europe of like, we know how to do the identity verification because it's very much spelled out for us by the regulator. We know that the social security number verification, that's legit. But if that fails, then what? And so we, at the time, my team had to scramble to say, okay, what happens in the case where this fails? Like, what do we fall back to? And so this was just kind of would have been a predictable hurdle if we'd gone in a bit more humble as a company and said, hey, how do other companies do it? What aspects of the product are going to work out of the box in the US and which are not? So that was kind of detail level feature that just did not translate even close to one-to-one from Europe to the US. But then at a higher level, that kind of a product and market fit level, Europe, not a very credit card forward market. Like Europe, most people, debit cards, or in Germany, it's like the EC cards. So like not even a debit card kind of thing. People are kind of almost afraid / at least skeptical of credit cards. And so N26's offering, which was like debit card, pretty card, metal card with some cool features of the account, great. No one needed a credit card, or no one really needed a credit card. The fact that they didn't offer one was not a problem. The US, on the other hand, completely flipped model. Like, the US is a credit-forward market that everyone wants a credit card because you get like points back. It's you spend with your credit card, you get 3%, 4%, 5% back, and that's the key value proposition for consumers. Like that's how you sell your credit card. You say, hey, you'll get 5% back on purchases at like grocery stores or what have you. And that's the value prop. You bring people in with that, and then you hope that you make enough money off the spend to make up for that. But if you don't have that, you're dead in the water from the start. And N26 didn't have a credit card. And then the debit card was sort of offering the sort of stuff that a lot of banks which in the US, banking, incredibly competitive, incredibly cutthroat market, were already offering a lot of this stuff. And so you hit the ground with this product that had maybe some bright spots there, like the metal card. That was kind of cool. That was fairly novel at the time, and some of the other aspects. But it didn't have that compelling market niche that it clearly filled in Europe, where Europe was hungry for a neobank. N26 came in and slotted into a niche that was super needed. The US didn't have that niche. The US didn't need a neobank because the domestic banks actually were reasonably tech forward already at that time. Plus, N26's product offering, as I said, no credit card, not a lot of those extra benefits, no reward points, was just behind the 8 ball out of the gate. So all of which is to say, be it at a narrow feature level or be it at a kind of like product market fit level, the experience in the US for N26 jumping over the pond was just one of running uphill from the start and trying desperately to play catch up rather than having gone in with this attitude of, hey, this is going to be hard. This is a new market. This is a big, complex market with a lot of sophisticated players. We have to take this seriously and think really hard about it from the start. There was a little bit of almost this, I don't want to say arrogance necessarily, but I think a little bit of complacency maybe about how much different it was going to be and how difficult it was going to be. I think a lot of European companies see the US and say, hey, look, this is the US, so little regulation. Look how sloppily regulated they are. It's going to be so easy. And look how much money there is there. This is just, they look at the US and it's like those cartoon dollar signs appear on their eyeballs. It's like, I think that is a great way to waste a lot of time and energy failing at entering a market that is much more complex than you think it's going to be. So I guess like all of which, like summarizing, international expansion is hard. Take it seriously is the lesson that I took from having lived through this experience.
It's very interesting, like your point on they thought the product has a really big advantage in Europe. So then if we enter US, we're going to kill it there. But then when you enter there, it's like people in the US actually didn't need this product from the first place. So it's definitely not selling ice to the Eskimo type of thing. Sounds like it didn't work out.
Exactly.
Did N26 change the product offering? Did you introduce like a credit card compared to a debit card?
I don't think they did. They had a good team that they put in place here, but it was very small and I don't think was invested in heavily enough to make these sort of giant changes that would have been required. Things like, should they bring a credit card to market? Or if they were going to stick with a debit card, what can they add to make it compelling to the US consumer? And so my understanding, I left the company before they exited the US, but it didn't take long before they left. And my understanding is that it was a case of a fairly small, talented but small team that attempted to do as much as they could by tweaking the core product. But ultimately, tweaks weren't what was required. It was really a case where they were going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, what is going to be a compelling product? And then turn around and say, okay, we've got this existing product, what can we take from there and use, rather than the other way around of say, we've got this core product, how much of it can we push into this market?
And when you worked at N26 and also Wise, just for the listeners, these are one of the biggest startups within Europe and also the biggest neobanks in the fintech sector, which is also, Revolut is also in that list, but as of now, just focusing on these two how was your experience working as a product manager there? Because at this stage that you worked in these companies, these were relatively not anymore a small company. And I think the it counts for, believe, more than 100 or 200 people. I think I'm even like estimating. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like
quite bigger.
10x.
1,000, did you say?
Yeah, more. Like I think Wise was 3,000 odd, and then N26 while I was there was something in the 2,000 range, maybe.
How do you feel your work, is it impacting the company? And if you a little bit explain about the hierarchy, how the company is structured, for the different stakeholders you worked, what were the batches of the team members working? I think Wise right now is, I believe it's 10 people per group. And that's, I think, how they're working now. I remember I spoke with the product manager some time ago, but that could be maybe one of the regions which is like that. So I'm just curious. And if you could compare both of them together.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've talked a lot about N26, so let me pivot to Wise for a little bit. There's a good question about impact you asked. And I was really happy that I joined Wise, and I really loved working at Wise for one reason in particular, and that was how mission-focused the company was and still is today. I'd always felt in my first few startup jobs this disconnect between day-to-day what I did and reason the company existed. Like, yes, I could draw the line between the features that I was shipping and my KPIs because, that's the core of the product management job. But it was like, then it was kind of a very shaky arrow between my KPIs, the grand mission of the company. It's like, yes, okay, like identity verification success rates have improved, which improves growth, which I started to fall down a little bit at that point. Whereas Wise does an amazing job of keeping every single employee laser focused on the mission. And not just employees, they talk about it openly to investors, to customers, to competitors, honestly. Like, this is one of the things I found amazing. Wise is so confident that their focus and their mission-driven nature will win out in the end, that they just sort of open the kimono, basically, as often as they can. And so the 4 mission pillars are, they want to make international money movements convenient, transparent, instant, and eventually free. Those are the mission pillars. And that got talked about, I don't want to say daily because it wasn't quite daily, but I would say weekly is not an overestimate. Like, there was literally like some reference to it would come up in Slack or via email or on a deck or something weekly, and everyone could say those, like, knew those mission pillars off by heart. You may not have memorized the exact state of them. I didn't know whether it was 30 seconds or 40 seconds transfer between the US and Estonia or whatever. But I knew what we were aiming for, and I knew that the company was working in the right direction. And that permeated down to the product team level of like everyone from the founder, and in fact, the founder was like Christo, who's one of the 2 founders and the CEO while I was working there, was incredibly serious about this. And so he didn't interfere or get involved at the level of decisions the product team made in terms of like feature decisions, but he did get involved at the level of, okay, every team, explain to me how your roadmap contributes to the mission. Like, how is it driving what they call mission 0? So like zero fee, 0 time, that sort of thing. And like that would every quarter, like that would come out during the planning cycle of like, okay, tell us what's on the roadmap, and then draw the dots of like, how is this making us faster, more transparent, more convenient, and like cheaper? Which on the one hand was kind of stressful. Like, it really put an extra layer of responsibility on you as a product manager to say, okay, I'm not just shipping features for my KPIs, I'm contributing to this mission, and I'm responsible for figuring out how to like help drive the company forward towards this mission. But it was amazing on the other hand, because it meant, okay, I'm doing something that matters. This is meaningful. This is driving the company towards mission zero. And mission zero is something that I still believe is incredibly important. Like international money transfers 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were awful. It was expensive. It was difficult. Western Union takes some sort of inordinate cut. And Wise has not only does it themselves very well and like does it very cheaply and quickly, they've also driven the rest of the industry towards that too. They've provided that lighthouse that has forced the banks and the money movement companies to come to them. Amazing mission I connect to, and then found it really validating and inspiring to then be constantly asking that question of like, okay, how is this connecting to the mission? And I mean, there are shortcomings in that. One of the things I found challenging there was I worked in a compliance product, so anti-money laundering and anti-fraud. Kind of difficult to connect that to the mission a lot of the time, because what you're doing, like really, if I said it out loud, the reason that the anti-money laundering team existed was if we don't do our job well, the company goes away. The company gets shut down. And so mission zero is dead because the company's gone away. But that's not a very satisfying story to tell. Like, you're not saying, well, yes, we made it cheaper. In fact, a lot of the time you've actually made it more expensive because you're having to employ operations agents. Or you haven't made it quicker, you've actually made it slower because you've slowed down some transfers to check whether they are money launderers. And so this was a challenge, but a good challenge to have, because it's still like the company's purpose, the company's mission was still mission zero. And it forced my team, my group, to be constantly saying, okay, look, in many ways, we are actually working against mission zero. We are harming mission zero. So how is it that we are justifying our existence? How can we still turn up at the quarterly plannings and with a straight face say, hey, it's still important that we exist. It's still important that there is a team dedicated to this. And here's why. So it keeps I think it keeps you sharp. It helped keep me very sharply focused on the point. So yeah, I found that amazing. And then in terms of switching gears a little bit to how the teams worked, that kind of autonomy, that delegating authority for what the team does, really, really played out at a very deep level for Wise. So 10 was about the right number. Like usually it's a product manager, maybe a product specialist, or like what in other companies would be a junior product manager, and then about 6, 7, 8 engineers. You might have a designer depending on which team you're on. Because we were a very operations adjacent team, we shared a designer, but there was still one to access. And then you would usually be partnered with some sort of team. If you were in a regional team focused on building out something for Germany, you might be partnered with what they called a banker, which I would think of as like a business development specialist. I was partnered with like product compliance people and then with operations teams. They weren't part of that kind of 10 that you were alluding to, but they were very, very closely involved stakeholders. And it was very much like, okay, look, Daniel, you're anti-money laundering product manager. Make it good. Tell us what you're going to do about it. Here's the people to work with, kind of thing. And then that permeated even to the extent of like the person who was above me on the hierarchy per se wasn't alluded to as my manager or my boss. It was my lead. And like, they were very serious about this terminology. Like I said manager a couple of times and then got corrected on Slack because they didn't want people being managed in terms of being directed by people who weren't the experts in that particular area. But they did want people to be given support and coaching and mentoring and leadership from above them to say, hey, I need help. I'm out of my depth, or there's something I'm grappling with. Lead, can you help me with this? Can you help give me some guidance on this? So yeah, so I felt like this was all, I really think Wise did a great job, still does a great job of having the entire company's approach geared in this direction of laser focus on the mission and delegation of authority to the ground level, to the people who are actually experts in that particular local problem, and achieving alignment via that high level mission focus of you're the experts, tell us what you're going to do, and draw the line to what the whole company is doing, which is this mission zero kind of thing. So Yeah, that's kind of how Wise works and how, and my experience of it, and why I really found it amazing in many ways. And it's something that's stuck in my head, that mission focus versus N26. I've alluded to it a little bit already, and I won't go on about it in too much detail, but my experience of N26 was that it was much more hierarchical and much more driven by that kind of command and control management style of it. It was there's a very heavy founder influence, not only in the direction the company as a whole was taking, but it permeated down to very, very granular level roadmap decisions. So things would drop down the hierarchy to the CPO, to the directors, to the heads of product, down to the product manager level on pretty tactical level decisions. And so the defense that a product manager would have to make during planning there was not the Wise model of I'm doing this and here's how it connects to the mission. I'm defending this arrow of I can tell you how it's going to make things cheaper, faster, etc. It was the defense of here's what I'm doing. Here's why that particular thing. Well, here's why I'm doing that specific thing. Here's how it's going to raise the growth rate or improve some KPI that my head of product, my director, etc. cares about. And so the focus was much more granular, more so than on the strategic level arc towards the mission. And was my experience. But otherwise, in terms of the team structure, similar kind of thing. It was very much that two pizza style team of 7, 8 engineers, product manager, embedded designer, nested within. It was a few product teams within what they call, I think it was a tribe by the time I left, but it was called a group initially. They experimented with a few different names, but basically 3 or 4 different product teams under a head of product focusing on one kind of area. So I looked at identity verification, which was part of the growth team. So increasing customer signups, which was nested within then it was a tribe. What was the next level up? I can't remember. Anyway, there were 3 directors, each of which looked after a different kind of big product area. So there was the global customer experience, there was the platform, and then there was the international markets, big area, and then they all added up to a CPO who answered to the CEO. So kind of similar structure on the surface to what we had at Wise, but in terms of how decisions got made and sort of the hierarchical or how the hierarchy manifested itself.
It's very interesting when you talked about the Wise's mission being clear and being repeated almost on a regular basis. Because exactly that this week, I was talking with Johnny McAllison. I think that's how his last name is. I hope I'm pronouncing it correct. But he's the director of Design Ops at Wise. And he exactly told me the same thing, that the mission is constantly being repeated. And also when you look at how the company got evolved, I started using Wise 5 years ago, and you kind of understand why it was different. Thought there are a lot of similarities using Wise in Revolut. I was not aware of that, but then I understood that the mission of Wise is not the same as the mission as Revolut. That's why they're kind of like a competitor, but they're not fully a competitor. So I find that super valuable for the companies to have a clear mission. And I find that also difficult as a product manager, that sometimes I understand that we are in a fast-paced world and everything is changing. So I understand that we need to be able to adapt fast and change things. But sometimes I feel like when I'm working on a product, when the mission is not super clear from the C-level, it's hard for me to prioritize functionality and think, how can we go there? Because maybe now mission is something, 3 months later it's another thing, which again is kind of understandable when you're working in startups. But I find that when companies nail that mission and what they really want to do, it just helps the entire organization to just unite and focus on tackling that problem.
Yeah, exactly. And you sort of end up with whiplash if the mission changes too often. I like the sort of levels of granularity model of this, of mission and vision should be something that really stays constant for the 5 to 7 year horizon. It needs to be a North Star that stays fixed. And then at the next level down, like the strategy, that's kind of more like a 1 to 3 year. It can change like maybe annually, maybe every 3 years. And then below that, the roadmap, maybe that's quarterly, maybe that's half year. And then below that, you've got the sprint. And then like you might throw out tickets daily, and that's okay because you expected that to do that. But that only works. You can only have that flexibility at the sprint level or even at the roadmap level if you've got the fixed North Star that you say, okay, even if my roadmap's pivoted from quarter to quarter, I know I'm still heading over there. Whereas if that North Star moves around, like who knows where the heck you're going to get to.
Now, moving to Google, what, in your experience, what's the biggest misconception about product management at large companies like Google compared to startups? And how do these environments differ for PMs in terms of priorities and processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is a topic close to my heart. I gave a talk about this at a conference in Budapest 2 years ago, I think. And it's something that took me a while to realize in my career, that some of the frustrations I was having with companies I was working at weren't because the company was bad, and it wasn't because what I sort of feared, which was maybe I'm just a bad product manager. It was because I was applying a lens of what I thought my job involved, which wasn't the correct fit for what that company needed at that time. And so like the biggest contrast for me is between like early stage startup product management and now that I'm at Google, this like, I don't want to say late stage, but like certainly established company is maybe the better way of putting it, product management, because that illustrates the kind of two ends of the spectrum. And I've worked at both sizes of company. I was employee number 10 at a little company in Berlin, and now I'm employee number, I don't know, my employee number has 7 digits in it at Google. I don't know what it is, but like a lot. And yeah, so at an early stage company, I guess the right question in both places is going, what is the most harmful thing that can happen? And then the flip side of that is, what's the company trying to do? So at an early stage company, the most harmful thing that can happen is that you don't grow. Because if you don't grow, you die. That's it. Like the funding dries up and game over. And so what's the company trying to do? The company is trying to find growth via product market fit, however it can. Like it needs to figure out, what can I build? What can they build that people will actually want and pay for? And everything else is secondary. It doesn't matter how efficiently you make that product. It doesn't really matter if it like perfectly meets all of the regulatory requirements at this stage. It doesn't matter if like to get it there, what's behind the scenes is actually the founder sitting in a black box somewhere typing out answers kind of thing, like the Mechanical Turk kind of model. Doesn't matter. None of these things is going to kill you. What's going to kill you is not finding product market fit and hence not growing. So as a product manager, your job becomes quite clear. That's like all you need to do, all you can afford to do is work out how to find product market fit, is iterate towards product market fit. So take what you've got, take the ideas you've got, obviously work, like take the founder's direction and their vision and keep trying to move the puzzle pieces around until something clicks as fast as you can, because death is just around the corner. Doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you've written the most perfect PRD. If it's taken you 3 days, that's 3 days too long. It doesn't matter if you have like filled in the regulatory template for the whatever agency you need to submit to pristinely. You submit it, by the time they get back to you, your company's dead. So no prizes are awarded for a beautiful document for a company that's dead. So early stage company, cutting corners as a PM is the name of the game in service of figuring out what is it that you can bring to market that's going to be compelling. And then you backfill and say, okay, we found the compelling offering. Now let's start fixing all of the problems I've left behind me in my search for this. Fast forward to an established company, and this is turned on its head. So what's the thing that the company fears? The company fears a threat to the existing massive pool of value that it's established. Google or any established company has a bunch of customers, makes a bunch of money. any threat to that, be it from losing customers, be it from regulatory scrutiny, be it from legal problems, anything like this, has the potential to create a whole lot more pain, heartache, and monetary loss than you could possibly create as one individual PM through some amazing feature. So mitigating downside risk from doing something harmful is what the company needs the most from you. And then once you've done that, the company still wants to grow. The company still wants to innovate. The company still wants to ship new products, ship new features. But the first thing the company needs you to do as a PM is blow up the existing source of value that they have so painstakingly created over several years, decades, or so on. So the risk appetite is very much averse. Startup company, there is no value. Like, you are sitting on some equity in a company that's actually on paper worth nothing, really. Like, you have no customers, you have no revenue. So there's nothing to lose. Like, throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, because what's the worst that can happen is it doesn't stick, you keep going. And an established company, tons of value to lose. And on the upside, like end of the spectrum, probably all of the really easy, good ideas have been shipped already. Like, there are seldom kind of golden apples sitting on the ground anymore. So your job is patient, iterative, careful product management work, which can still be innovative, which can still be like shipping features that are genuinely useful and can be industry defining, but not in a way that just says, well, like, hang the torpedoes, we're going to plunge off the cliff, because that is not what the company needs, and you will not be rewarded for this, and you will find yourself out of a job pretty quickly if you act like this. Or if you want to act like this, that's not a bad thing, that's not a harmful thing. Go do it in a startup mode, because what you want, the way you want to work, the way that you find, the style of product management you find rewarding is not going, you're going to be swimming upstream at an established company. And the same in the other way around. Like, if you're someone who is methodical, who likes process, who likes documenting things beautifully, who likes writing the beautiful PRDs, and you go to a startup and you have founders tearing their hair out that you're taking so long, that's not a failing in you. It's just a mismatch between you and the company. Go get a job at Google, Meta, Apple, Amazon, somewhere that values that process, somewhere that values crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Don't kill the company. Don't kill the startup that you joined by taking weeks to do something that should take hours, kind of thing. So that was my big finding, and like the big thing that I've tried to like adhere to in my career, and the advice that I give to more junior product managers of know how you like to work and know what sort of work that you want to do right now, and find a company stage that wants that style of work, so that you're not fighting what the company was. You're running in the same direction as the company needs you to run.
It's very interesting. When I'm thinking about what you just talked about and kind of focusing on your career, you started in banking with the economics background. You worked at N26, which is a fintech company, and then you worked at Wise, another fintech, and now in Google, you're still kind of in that realm of fintech and payment. So if there's a product manager who worked, let's say, something which was different, and they want to kind of navigate it, enter this new realm, I find that very difficult, because always the hiring managers look at what was my past experience, what were the products I focus on, and would I have anything to offer for that product. So in a way, the products you work in the past, they define what you work in the future. Correct?
A little, yeah. Yeah. I would say yes, but not 100%. I would encourage anyone out there listening to this who would like to make a career pivot, whether it's into product management or into a different industry, take a look at my background, have a look at my LinkedIn. Yes, looking backwards, like Steve Jobs said, it's easy to connect the dots looking backwards. And you can say, oh, look, obviously, Daniel, like fintech was the destiny, like economics, like central bank, like neobank, Wise, Google Payments, obviously. But let me like remind you of Escape Room And then also when I first got into product management, it was travel company, healthcare company, brief blockchain company. Did I miss anything else? And then I've also been a university tutor and a house cleaner and a newspaper delivery person and all this sort of stuff. So I think the way I've approached my career is don't try to solve. It's impossible to solve for the end state from the square that you're at. Like, you can only solve for the next step. And sometimes that next step is best taken as a logical extension of where you are. So local optimization and say, okay, look, I did a neobank. Now I'm going to go to Wise. And I've done 2 financy things. I'm going to do Google Payments. And sometimes it's a global optimization attempt where it's a big leap. And you say, okay, I've been a central banker. I'm going to try to make an escape room company or something like that. And I think as you age, as you develop in your career, probably, hopefully, that exploit algorithm starts to narrow towards the exploit a little bit more. And you say, okay, actually, I know which stage of the company I'm best at. I know which industry I like. I know I know where I want to live and work, kind of thing. But maybe not perfectly. Maybe at some stage you still want to take a big leap. And certainly, and earlier in your career is a great time to take those big leaps. Number one, because who knows, on the other side might be something amazing. But number two, more importantly, it teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you about a new industry. It teaches you about a new company stage. It teaches you about a new role, which is invaluable information for helping you get to a point in 2, 5, 10 years' time that is much better than if all you'd done was take small, like the logical next step based on your existing background. So, like, yes, you can kind of tell a coherent story now about my career. That wasn't always the case. And I don't think it wasn't a bad thing at the time when I was taking random leaps. And I would actually encourage people to take more steps that don't make sense at the time if they feel exciting to you and feel like they're going to teach you something about yourself and your career that will be valuable to you in the future.
Yeah. So for the folks listening, do not lose hope and continue following what you think could be the best for you.
That's right. That is a good, thoroughly endorse that statement.
So when you're starting a new product management job, obviously you switch from multiple companies. What strategies you found to be most effective for hitting the ground running and making an impact in the first year?
I guess if I had to boil it down to sort of 3 top tips, I think I'd say number one, every single product role I've taken on, I've come in hoping and expecting for it to be just in a beautiful, clean state. I was handed a roadmap, I was handed KPIs, I was handed like a really clear vision and strategy and everything, and then I'd just be able to run for a few years. It's never been like that. Ever, 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 ever. And I think that's inevitable because if they're hiring for that role, it's because they need someone to do this stuff. Like, that's the product manager job. Like, you're not, if they had all that stuff, they wouldn't need to hire you, is sort of the trap that you're falling into. Not even trap, that's the game you're playing. And so come in knowing that and having that as your first intention of like, come in and define, what am I doing here? Why does this team exist? What does good look like? Where are we going? And like, that's in contrast to jumping in and getting stuck into the tactical level of like, okay, let me write some tickets. Let me get involved in the sprint planning. Let me unblock whatever the team's working on. Useful stuff, probably important to do some of it. But if that's all you do, you're going to wake up in 6 months and realize that the team has just kind of wandered all over the place in 6 months, rather than spending the time up front to say, okay, I'm almost certainly inheriting a mess. Where am I going to go to get us out of this mess? What is that North Star? What is the direction that we want to head in over the 6 to 12 month horizon? So spend that time up front. The second is, and this is speaking more to the style of product manager I am, but I'd like to think this is generically good advice. There is no such thing as too much time spent building relationships, especially initially. Like, there's something my lead at Wise and I talked about, and he really liked it, that I said to him during my interview, which is like, At the point at which you need someone, it's too late to start building a relationship. Like, you needed to have that relationship built and strengthened several months ago so that when you needed a favor, they knew who was picking up the phone rather than saying, who the hell is Daniel? They may still do you a favor if they don't know who you are, but you have not given yourself a very good odds. And your best time to do this is upfront, because early in your new PM job, you have a blank check for two things. Number one is not being that productive. Like, you can just spend your time talking to people, taking notes, thinking. Whereas, as anyone who's been a product manager knows, very quickly you get to the point where you may not even have time for lunch on some days, let alone time to think. So use that time up front, build those relationships. And the second blank check you have is being able to ask stupid questions, because you're new. Like, no one thinks any of your questions are stupid at that point, because everyone knows what it's like to be new, and everyone expects you to come in and not know things and want to know things. So it looks good for you if you come in and ask questions, even if some of them actually are kind of dumb, and you have that blank check. So use that time up front, build those relationships as wide as possible, because you'll be surprised how often you need someone outside your immediate orbit. Like, it's very tempting to say, okay, I'm going to meet my engineering manager, I'm going to meet my design lead, maybe I'll spend time with the engineers. That's pretty much it. And then you get to the point 3 months down the track where suddenly you need to rush a feature to production and you need someone from legal to sign off, and you have no idea who that person is and they have no idea who you are. And that is a bad way to start that relationship. Whereas if you've spent that half an hour up front to say, hey, I'm Daniel, just started as a PM, I think you're my legal person, can we just have a first call? At least they know your name, and at least you know their name 3 months later when you have a disaster. So tip number 2, spend time up front building relationships. And then tip number 3, trying to condense a lot of pages of thoughts into one. Let me have a quick look. I've got some notes. I've got my notes next to me. I'm going to take a quick look at what I've said. Okay, no, that's a good, yeah. I think tip number 3 is optimize initially for learning, not for impact. Long run, even medium run, the point of a product manager is to have impact on the product. Like, that's why I love the product manager job. And I think you alluded to it earlier, Mia. You like being a product manager because of the breadth of the role. Like, you talk to marketing, you talk to engineers, you work on whatever needs doing. And that's because the point of the product manager role is like, here's a product, make it good. Like doesn't matter how many PRDs you wrote, doesn't matter how many tickets you wrote, doesn't matter how many meetings you had. If the product doesn't end up good, if you haven't had that impact, why the heck do we pay your salary? And so eventually, like, you want to get to impact pretty quickly. But initially, the best use of your time is to learn as quickly as possible what's going on. Like, where is the team right now? Where is the product right now? Where is the company right now? What are the challenges? What does the past roadmap look like? And what mistakes were made and what successes did they have? Where is the team struggling? Where are the friction points between your team and other teams? Where are the biggest customer pain points? Who are the most critical other roles? What are other teams doing that might help you? All these questions, there's 1,000 questions to answer. And if you spend time up front answering those well, you'll be able to come in and say with confidence, here's the next thing we should do. Here's the thing after that. Here's a 1-year roadmap. And I'm pretty sure this is right, or I have high confidence that this is at least in the right direction because I've spent the time up front to know where we are and know what landmines are around. Versus, I guess, the opposite of that is saying, okay, I need to optimize for impact. And the best way to optimize for impact is jumping right in and starting to dig a hole as soon as I can, like pick up a shovel. Very tempting because you immediately show impact, but you immediately show activity, which can be quite popular. Like, I'm sure the engineers will enjoy seeing you like get stuck in. Your manager will see that you're taking action. In the short term, it looks quite good. The big risk and the very likely outcome, though, is you're digging in the wrong direction. Or if you've dug the right hole the first time, it was probably due to pure luck, and then you won't have any idea where to dig the next hole. So, third tip, which kind of rhymes with the first two very much, which is like use those first few months not to be productive, but to lay the good groundwork, is optimize for learning initially. Learning about the team, learning about the product, learning about the company, learning about what surrounds you, so that when the time comes when you do have to like get stuck in, start executing, start making tactical decisions, you can do so on a firm foundation rather than making it up as you go, as it were. So I think those are my top 3 tips for starting a new PM job that hopefully, I'd like to think that if I'd followed those with some of my previous PM jobs, it would have set me up for success a lot faster than I found myself.
I absolutely love the 3 of them. On the first one, yeah, I think that is exactly as you said, because when you enter the company, it's like what you thought is not the case. And usually the barrier to entry is also quite high. So, for example, what I faced always in the interview question, I'm asked the most complex questions. But when I enter, like I see it, not like we're doing basic things, but it's like it's not as complex as the interview. So that's what one. Second, I think when you talked about building relationship, it sounds so simple, but it's very difficult. And building relationship with different departments is also very difficult. And I find that when you build a relationship, for example, with engineers, if I want to build a relationship with engineer, if I want them to like me, they need to trust me. And how can they trust me? If they know I also have technical understanding. So I just don't just go around and say, no, I don't think this is not the right approach, because they're the creators, they're the engineers, and I'm not. So why would that engineer listen to my approach? Why would that person be like, I will follow your guideline. Maybe I know better than you. So when you show you have expertise in that field, it builds trust with them, and they understand that you're just not saying random things. I also find that with designers that when you show them, I have understanding of design, I know what we're doing, but if I follow perfectly what you're saying, we will not, for example, get enough revenue. And revenue is also important for the company to grow. So I find that super important. And I kind of also see that, like how we talked in the beginning, building relationship, you need to understand their cultures, their background, their departments, what's their goal, what they want to achieve. So how can you help them? And I think understanding these different departments as a PM will make you super successful. And when you talked about optimizing for learning, I also saw in my peers when they enter in different companies, some companies, when you join as a PM, they give you a phase to learn. You cannot build something which you don't have any understanding. And it doesn't matter how great PM you are, it doesn't matter what is your experience. Every product is different. They had to make very different decisions to build that product until that point. It could be the technical decision, it could be business decision. So you need, I think, few months to really understand what's going on in the company, what is the mission, who are different stakeholders, what exactly the users need, how can you satisfy those users. I think if you can nail these 3, which you talked about so well, I think you will have a really good success within that company. We are slowly getting close to the end of this episode. So I would like you to a little bit more talk about your book. So what is it about? Can you a little bit share a bit of a sneak peek from any section and any tips of it, when it's going to be out? And if you have anything you would like the listeners to follow, check you on socials, your blog post.
Yeah. So like I said, it's about starting a new PM job well, because I guess I'm writing the book that I wish existed when I was first becoming a PM. And also it's sort of dedicated in many ways to a lot of the junior PMs that I have been and still am mentoring, because one of my big passions is helping people get into the role, because I love being a product manager and I see so many people around in other roles or at university or just people I know who would be amazing PMs who just don't know how to get in to the role, and then also just find it hard to succeed once they're in it. So yeah, so still working on it. I'm still in the middle of the draft, and I have a 2-month-old daughter now, which has slowed down progress somewhat. So cannot promise about a due date, but I'm hoping for kind of middle of next year tentatively to have something to show the world. But yeah, really, like it's meant to be a how-to, very practical guide to the first year of the PM job. It's not meant to be the sort of business book you read and then you think, okay, that was fun reading, but what did I learn? It's meant to be more like an instruction manual of, okay, like we said, build relationships. Okay, what does that look like? Like, how do I figure out which relationships to build? Let's build, for example, I've got like advice and a worksheet on mapping out the influence webs within your company, like who talks to whom, like who is involved in decision making, who needs to sign off on features, help you understand, okay, where is my time best spent when I am doing that initial relationship building? Like, and that's just one example. Like, the idea, it's a bunch of chapters saying, okay, in your first 12 months, here's the things to do, here's some practical exercises to work on them with. And then my hope, I haven't done this part yet, but I'm intending to make a companion manual for your boss as a new PM to give to them to say, hey, here's the guide. Here's what I'm planning to spend my first 12 months on. Take a look. I'd like you to follow along with me and for us to use this as a check-in point for how I'll be spending my time. And I'd like you to help me with things like, whom should I meet? Like, what do you think my KPI should be? What does success look like? All this sort of stuff. Hopefully middle of next year, I'll be able to release to the world this sort of how-to guide, first 12 months of a PM job and accompanying manager manual infused with the Daniel personality throughout. Like, I wanted to write a book that I would enjoy reading as someone as well, that has some personality, that has some fun in it, that is the sort of book where you're not just reading it because, it's a textbook for your university class or what have you, but because you're actually enjoying hearing the stories that I'm telling and benefiting from the exercises. So it's taking longer than I thought because I'm trying to make sure that it ends up in that state, something that people are going to truly find valuable and will keep returning to. And hopefully, the success metric for me will be people then recommend it to other people. And then when they become managers themselves, buy it for their direct reports. That will be, for me, a gold star for...
I'm sure it's going to be a great book, and I'm really much looking forward to the book. Thank you so much for joining this episode, and Daniel Thomason.